Good afternoon and welcome to today's fifth quadrant webinar looking at the contact centre industry benchmark insights. This is the second of three webinars that we'll be sharing our insights from this year's report, and today we'll be focusing on the multi-channel evolution. I'm Stephanie Bauer, the Head of Customer Experience Consulting for Fifth Quadrant. Joining me today is Dr. Catriona Wallace. Hi Catriona.
Hey Stephanie. So very pleased to be here with you today and share some of the insights I have on the Australian contact centre industry. I have a deep background in call and contact centres, having been in and around the industry for the last 15 years. But more recently, I have worked in a company that I founded called Flamingo AI, which provides cognitive virtual assistance. So it's a machine learning company that either augments or could potentially replace human workers and indeed contact centre agents. So I'm very excited today, Steph, to hear the results of how Australian contact centres and contact centre managers are thinking about their multi-channels and channel management. And I would love to talk about the role that we see AI and virtual assistants and chatbots playing in this.
Thanks Catriona, and I'm sure you'll bring some great global insight to our conversation today. So for today's agenda, what we'll be covering off are briefly just on the methodology that we've used for the benchmarking study. The three main topic areas for today's session are customer interaction types, the evolution of the multi-channel environment, and technology as an enabler of customer experience. So firstly, just very briefly, I'll cover off the methodology that we've used for this year's study. Contact centre managers and executives who have responsibility for contact centres throughout Australia completed our questionnaire in September of 2017. We had a total of 143 respondents that really covered all industry segments, and we've grouped the results for analysis based on government health and education, financial services, services organisations and consumer products. We've also analysed, where appropriate, by contact centre size, and we'll share some of those insights with you as we move through today's session. So firstly, we'll look at customer interaction types. So here we're looking at the proportion of customer service and sales activity that's currently happening within contact centres. Probably not surprisingly, customer service interactions represent 80% of the total interactions in the average contact centre, with 15% being either inbound or outbound sales. The highest proportion of sales activity is in the consumer products sector, and again, not surprisingly, larger contact centres are more likely to conduct outbound sales. Next, we're looking at inbound versus outbound activity. And overall, 84% of all contact centre interactions in Australia are inbound. And that's remained at a very similar proportion for the last few years, with proactive outbound contact neither increasing or declining as the industry continues to focus on inbound demand rather than perhaps proactive outbound interventions to look at preempting the needs of customers. And we'll talk more about those use of different channels and how that can affect the overall channel experience later today. And we're going to move now straight to look at the contact channels. And firstly, the channels that are in use today. So this chart is looking at the percentage of organisations that offer each channel. And that's based on today, and then we'll talk about what is expected to happen over the course of the next 12 months. So not surprisingly, the majority of contact centres offer agent-assisted phone and email as customer interaction channels. 39% of organisations now provide customer interaction via social media, with 2% of organisations now using chatbots. Catriona.
Yeah, so we're seeing in Australia the interest and use of chatbots in contact centres really lagging behind what we're seeing internationally. So if we follow the the predictions of the analysts who are looking at this on a global level, 30% of all customer interactions will be handled by a chatbot or a virtual assistant by the year 2020. So as we step through these very interesting benchmarking results, Steph, we do see a significant uplift in the interest of organisations in chatbot technology going forward. But one of the core things I would like to call out on this slide, having been someone who's been around the contact centre industry and benchmarking results for many years, is the reliance still on voice, traditional phone and agent, human assistant doing voice and email. So we're again seeing Australia probably lagging behind the US, which is where I spend a lot of my time now, with regard to still this heavy dependence on human without too much technology assistance. One of the nice things here, if we group then all the self-service channels, they sit around 70%, so the online self-service, some of the web chat / video, we would look at speech recognition in that, chatbot in that, sits around 70%. So there is a growth in these channels, but still not rivaling the voice channel in Australia. So I think the patterns that we see in the data are very interesting as we step into the 2018 findings about what organisations are thinking of investing in by way of channel. But to me, I am concerned that we just don't see much movement away from the heavy reliance on voice and email. And I'm very interested if any of the audience wanted to drop into the chat pane their thoughts on why this is, because certainly the technology is there. But let's see if we can get some response from the audience. So my key finding there, Steph, would be still self-service, lagging behind agent and email, and we really need to see that start to flip ahead of that.
Yeah, agree. And what we found in the first webinar, where we looked at the size of the contact centre industry as a whole in Australia, we're seeing a mean seat growth of 9% this year, which, whilst that's expected to slow slightly, we're still expecting to have an increase of 5% during 2018. So if we think about that in terms of channel activity, I would really suggest that there is still a gap in a lot of organisations in terms of providing a good first contact resolution across the channel environment, which as a result is causing that usage of phone to continue to be the primary interaction point if customers don't feel that they can have resolution in their channel of choice. So it's interesting to see where we are today. But then if we look to what's expected for the future, so this is looking now at the percentage of organisations that are expecting to offer each channel during next year. Self-service functionality is really expected to increase as a channel offered from 38% this year to 53% of organisations in 2018. And we've certainly seen that as an objective for most organisations to really focus on that reduction in cost to serve through the transition of more simplex transactions to the self-service environment. A 15% increase in organisations also is expected that would offer web or video chat. Interestingly, social media is expected to stay static, and 14% of organisations are expecting to offer chatbots during 2018, compared to just 2% for this year, which is for me showing the drive from a cost management perspective continuing. And as we heard in the first webinar, 45% of organisations are stating that improving efficiency is their biggest challenge this year. So it correlates nicely there that the biggest step change in terms of overall cost to serve for most contact centres will indeed be in automation and the use of chatbot. Katrina?
Yes, look, I think that is very good news in these results, Steph. And if we think about what most heads of CX or contact centre managers are saying to us, it is indeed an efficiency drive that they're on currently. But typically also they may need to still grow the business if they have a sales capability and also improve customer experience. So we know if we have those three perspectives, enormously difficult to be able to sell, reduce cost and provide better customer experience. Everybody on the webinar knows that. Really, in our view, the only way that can be done is with self-service and automation, but perhaps not self-service and automation in the traditional way that has been done using online web forms, but stepping up into the newer applications such as virtual assistants, such as chatbots. I'm very interested in the fact that social media isn't looking to grow. I think
interesting.
We've come to a level of maturity in social media. And the other one is in smartphone apps. So smartphone apps is predicted to grow from 7% in 2017 into 17% in 2018. We would see results in other markets internationally contradict that somewhat. So we are seeing the decline in apps over the next 2 years, which comes as no surprise to people on the webinar today, because there are really only a handful of apps that we use, banking, probably telecommunications, data usage, travel and entertainment. So what we will see replacing smartphone apps is actually the rise of personal virtual assistants. So whether it's your Siri, Cortanas, Alexas, in our case we have Rosie, we see the virtual assistants replacing the apps going forward. So interesting that we see some growth here in Australia. We will expect that to drop off. Similar to social media might plateau, and then the rise of the newer channels that are AI assisted.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next few years in terms of that change of the channel mix. And certainly from a cost management point of view, that's going to be something to watch carefully in the industry over the next few years. So next we're looking at the percentage of interactions by channel. So this is looking at the percentage based on an overall view of the Australian market as to which interactions are handled via which channel. And this year, a total of 71% of interactions were handled via the phone channel. The remaining 29% of interactions are handled using other channels, with email at 16%, the most prevalent. The proportion of contacts that are handled via phone channels has decreased at a much slower rate than perhaps was expected, with only a decrease of around 3% in the last 5 years. That's interesting based on the predictions in the industry that we've seen in previous years, that we're really talking about the death of the contact centre and the absolute decline in voice interaction. Interesting again that we've seen email interactions increasing at a higher rate than the decline in voice, from 10% a number of years ago to now 16% this year. Catriona?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and certainly email is not dead and far from dead. We know one of the real challenges in the contact centre is email response and email analysis, and really knowing how email should be handled. But again, I think what we're seeing is perhaps a failure to deliver on return on investment or on business cases with some of the newer channels. If we look at the area that we have expertise in, which is around chatbot, we see that less than 1% of interactions are currently handled through chatbot. There's been some pretty spectacular fails in the chatbot world of late, particularly in the telecommunications sector. So what we will see is some of these early stage adoptions of this technology perhaps not working, but then starting to see other players rising in their positions. So chatbot we now see evolving into virtual assistants, which have a much stronger machine learning or AI backing. So we'll start to see the companies that are going to invest in chatbots and in using AI-based responses, whether it's chatbot or email or even voice, starting to rise and starting to shift this. But again, Steph, it constantly surprises me that it just never moves as fast as we've either hoped or expected.
And I think, if we think about it from a consumer perspective, as our expectations have changed and evolved over time, where organisations perhaps were seeking a reduction in demand across voice channels with the introduction of a new channel, what we're actually finding is that we're using more channels as consumers. So overall contact demand is actually increasing, which also talks to the increase in seat size in the Australian market, because that demand is actually across multiple channels.
Right, and I was with a Canadian bank last week, and they said, we're not sure what happens in Australia, but every time we introduce a new channel here with an eye to reducing cost, it actually increases our call volume by 15%. And I said, it's exactly the same as the Australian market, and that we've seen that consistently over the last 15 years. Add a new channel, 15% of increased traffic to the phone.
And that's it's a topic we'll dive quite in detail into in the final webinar of the series, to really look at performance across the channel environment, both from a target perspective but also actual performance, and perhaps the most useful cost management metric of first contact resolution, and how the different channels are performing in that environment, which is interesting in terms of where we'll go into the future. So what we're looking at now in terms of future interactions and the channel breakdown. So next year it's expected that the phone channel will continue to decrease and will make up a total of 63% of total interactions, reducing from 71% as we were this year. Self-service is anticipated to increase from 5 to 9%, whilst most of the digital channels are expected to grow by 1 to 2%. So as we've just talked through, I think it will be really interesting to see how that evolves over the next few years, and that we really see some step differences in the usage of those digital and self-service channels over time.
And that looks there, Steph, compared to current state 2017, a shift of a delta of about 10% away from phone towards the digital channels, which is a good thing.
It is. Perhaps still not quite as much of a step difference than we were expecting this year, but it's good to see.
Yeah, and if I could give a little bit of insight into your third webinar, we do know, as we all know, in call and contact centre, first call resolution is the metric that is most important to measure, that we're seeing some of the web-based channels actually outperforming some of the voice channels in first call resolution, which was actually surprising to me, but very interesting.
It is, and with that drive to cost management, certainly a big focus area for most organisations currently. So next we're going to look to interaction management by agent. So here we're talking about multi-skilling and what that means in terms of how organisations are optimising the workforce to handle all of this increased demand via multiple channels that are still managed via the contact centre. So here we can see that nearly half of all agents at 47% handle both phone and digital interactions, and not surprisingly, larger contact centres with 100 plus seats are much more likely to dedicate agents to phone-only interactions, and that's obviously due to the scale of the operations, and that from an efficiency perspective it makes much more sense to have dedicated phone-only agents rather than everybody being multi-skilled. Where we look at this from a smaller seat size perspective, there again from an efficiency and an optimisation perspective, the smaller contact centres are much more likely to have fully multi-skilled approaches that balance the demand across the channel environment with how to optimise the workforce.
Yeah, so I find this so fascinating. For so many years in this sector we've talked about, is it better to specialise the agents, or is it better to them have multi-channel? And we see the traditional pattern here of the smaller centres do a good job in having multi-channel agents, but we see the larger centres starting to focus on, if you're a voice agent, you do voice. If you are a digital agent, you just do digital. And I think the thinking originally was that it was much better to have multi-channeled agents and even multi-product agents, but I think we've seen that bear out to largely not be true, and that this specialisation of channel is the way to go. But I'm encouraged that particularly the smaller seats are actually looking at effective multi-channel agent handling. What we'll see with the technology that we're interested in, which is virtual assistants, chatbots, is that we do see the rise of the human-assisted virtual assistant.
Yes.
So where we match a virtual assistant who is a software or a machine with a human call center agent, and the two of them work together. So beyond this, there is something called human augmentation rather than even multi-channel handling, where the bots and the human call center agents will work together. So your buddy in the call center will not necessarily be a human, but will be a machine. And we're extremely excited about the potential that that has, because it looks to lift 20% productivity of call center agents. And if you think about where really resources and effort needs to go in improving the performance or efficiency of call center agents, it's typically not the high performers, the 10%
right.
of high performers or the 10% of low performers. It really is, how do we move that 80% of sort of average performing call center agents up the bell curve? We really believe that augmenting them with software will be one of the ways to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's the holy grail of every contact centre manager, and has been for many years, of how do you lift performance and optimise individuals to their optimal capability, so that all of your performance is driving in the right direction. And as we'll see in the total benchmark report, and we'll talk about at the next webinar, agent turnover in the contact centre industry remains at a relatively high level, and so that curve to competency and the time to get to a level of efficiency is a continual cycle when you're replacing contact centre staff. So certainly from a technology perspective, that's going to be one to watch in terms of how that can really make a step difference in the industry.
Let me just give a quick insight into that, Steph, because the speed to competency is a big thing. It's quite an expensive exercise for call centres to invest in. How quickly a human gets speed to competency. So we did an implementation in the US for a life insurance virtual assistant. So it was a virtual assistant that guided customers through their full life insurance quotation experience and put them into application. The virtual assistant's speed to competency was within a 7-week period, less than 1,000 interactions, went from 0 understanding and competency to 85% plus, able to handle every interaction and every question a customer had. So what we're going to see is a little bit of pressure against how quickly can the machines learn and be able to service customers versus how quickly can humans learn and able to service customers. And again, maybe another topic for another day is the great debate around machine versus human, or machines augmenting humans, but very much something that I encourage all call center, contact center managers and CX people to start to think about, because it's coming, as I say, like a freight train towards us, the rise of AI-based call centers and contact centers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly something that we'll be talking more about at future events. So we're going to move now to our technology section. So this is the last area that we're going to share today. And it's really to look at what's happening within the industry in terms of all of the foundational basic technology platforms that should of course be in place in every contact centre. What's interesting for us is we've done the report and the insights for many years. Some of those foundational technologies that a fairly significant proportion of contact centres have not made those investments, which is incredibly interesting. So we've seen this year that 23% of contact centres don't currently use an IVR to direct calls. which has actually increased from around 15 to 18% a number of years ago. So that would seem to show a trend that the use of IVR is on the decline, somewhat marginally for Australia, and that's as a result of using more concierge type of service or having calls handled by frontline staff in the first instance. Virtual hold is in place for 45% of contact centres, and that's increased quite significantly over the last few years from around 22%. However, what's really interesting to me is that a third of contact centres don't use a workforce management system. And that's given that the number one challenge that has been stated for contact centres again this year is about improving efficiency. Workforce management software and technologies are obviously critical in any contact centre above the sort of 50-seat mark to ensure that that's optimised, particularly when there is so many different channels involved in most contact centres now. So that's actually quite surprising to see. And then equally with CRM and knowledge management technologies, 29% or nearly a third are not using a CRM, and over a third are not using a knowledge management system, which when we then think about all of the channel environment and that the knowledge management database or source of data should really be feeding that whole channel environment to make sure that the experience is seamless regardless of the channel that's being used by the customer, because we know that they're likely to be using multiple channels. So really thinking about it from a technology perspective, knowledge base is absolutely critical for feeding self-service and digital channels, for all of the human interaction channels, but of course is needed to have that knowledge book to create further self-service opportunities and to use other technologies in the future. Catriona?
Yeah, look, I agree, Steph. We were assuming that some of the smaller contact centres will be the ones that don't have some of these core staples that we would expect to see in the call centres. So with a 25% not having IVR, call recording, or ACD, e-learning, CRM tools is still surprising. And then if we get down into the some of the other automated, really less than 50% have any of the automated self-service technologies. So again, on this, I would have expected these numbers to be higher by now. But I think the encouraging, Steph, is then what we're seeing organisations looking to purchase in 2018.
That's right. And there, what we're seeing is that the most significant investment that's expected for 2018 is in web chat technology, which will actually see 81% of contact centres in Australia using web chat technology in the very near future, and that's increased at a massive rate from only about 22% 4 or 5 years ago. What's interesting though, if we think about the whole channel environment, is that we're also predicting through this year's research that web chat is only expected to make up about 4% of total interactions this next year. So that balance between having an investment in a technology to ensure that you're preempting that need for perhaps using web chat more so as a self-service support to guide people and to ensure that self-service take-up is reducing overall cost to serve for most organisations, is probably where that focus is heading in terms of having that investment in place now. And we would expect to see quite a significant uptake and increase in the use of web chat over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so this is very interesting because what we know historically is that when organisations have introduced web chat as a cost reduction tool, in fact, didn't reduce cost, in fact, is more expensive typically than a phone interaction. And that's when the web chat has been predominantly human-based, so it is actually a human web chatting with a customer. Then when things moved on and it was automated, which is just what we call rules-based template matching web chat, so canned responses, moderately useful, not particularly. What we're really seeing now, and I would hope that this web chat is machine learning or artificially intelligence based web chat, which is where the industry is going, we'll start seeing a much better result from the customer's perspective, the customer's experience, plus the cost saving from using fully automated web-based applications, whether they're a web chat, a chatbot, or a virtual assistant type product. These machines are very clever now. And what we call them is the ones that are AI or machine learning based, artificial narrow intelligence. So the chatbots or the virtual assistants in this case learn a product or a customer inquiry domain and become an expert in it very quickly, and are able to provide a much better customer service, plus can work 24/7, never have a sick days, never need to have a break. And I think we're only just now in the last perhaps 12 months at a stage of maturity in the web chat sector where this technology is actually now going to be better for customers and actually be much more efficient than what we've currently seen today.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And we're actually running research now at the moment looking from the other side of the coin at consumer preference and usage from a channel perspective, which will in future events will provide us that kind of 360 view as to where the industry is planning to go versus consumer expectation and appetite for use of different channels. So it's always interesting to see. And then next, we're really talking about the use of technology in contact centres here. And this is incredible to see this year, that the average number of applications that are used by customer-facing staff across the industry in Australia is currently 5. With 24% of organisations having to navigate across between 6 to 10 applications. And even more incredibly, there's 70% of organisations where frontline agents are having to use 11 or more applications. I mean, this from an efficiency perspective is just
crazy.
Is astounding in terms of being able to look from an efficiency and an optimization perspective, that lack of integration is adding to handling times from multiple channels, not just within the voice channel, where frontline agents are having to repeat information or duplicate data entry across multiple technology platforms. This is a really big area that to make any real difference in terms of efficiency in contact centre world, this is something that should be a big priority for many contact centres. Katrina.
Yeah, look, it's astounding that there is average number of applications that a call centre agent is going to use is 5, with up to a quarter of them using 6 to 10. So there has to be better ways to do that. Because it will continue to drive inefficiency. And we're not necessarily seeing, we know sitting behind this, there is a real challenge with knowledge management systems in contact centres. And in my area, in the AI field, we're seeing machine learning engines starting to take the place of traditional contact centre knowledge management systems, so that you can actually present an employee virtual assistant to help the employees, instead of navigate multiple systems, the AI will do that instead. So we will see some solutions, but largely this is still driving a huge amount of inefficiency.
That's right.
For contact centres.
That's right. And really to kind of sum up for today's session, I think as an industry over the last few years, contact centres are not changing or innovating at a rate that we would have perhaps expected to see, both from a technology-driven perspective, but also in terms of those real critical pain points that just haven't changed year on year in terms of the big ticket items from a cost management point of view, of the level of attrition, the level of sick leave, as well as then the inefficiencies and the time to competency, that over the next few years, the only real step difference that's going to change that is going to be technology driven. So it'll be really interesting to see how our results look next year and over the next 2 to 3 years, that we'll have a different story in the benchmarking report.
So one of the things I'd like to say, Steph, too, in some of the trends we're seeing, particularly in the US, is the rise of virtual assistants, not just for in contact centres, but for customers, and then the interaction of machine to machine. So as we're thinking about this, and we see slow but considerate movement from voice channels towards self-service and digital, layered over the top of that with this coming of AI at such a rapid rate, we'll also start to see another layer, which is actually removes calls and interactions from the call centre and puts it from machine to machine. So we've got a client in the US who uses our Flamingo technology to guide customers through their auto insurance experience. They're trialling Alexa for customers at home, where the customer interacts with Alexa, then Alexa can potentially interact with Rosie, and the machines do business together rather than the call centre agent and the customer. So layered on the top of this will be some very cool, clever AI-based technologies, which will also change how we think about customer contacts going forward.
Yeah, it's exciting times, and it's certainly how things change over the next few years is going to be interesting to watch. So that's everything from our session today. We'll be running our final third webinar that looks at the insights from this year's benchmarking report on the 22nd of May. And there we'll be looking at improving customer experience in contact centres so that we can do more of a deep dive from a people and performance perspective. Thank you for everybody for attending today. It's been an interesting session, and we hope that you're able to join us for our final session on the 22nd of May. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks Katrina.
Pleasure.